Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's special guest speaker. You have already heard that he is the son of our President and First Lady, Drs. Jack and Mary Ann Lewis. And I've known the Lewis family now for almost 25 years. Hate to say that, it kind of dates me. Yet when I realized that I would have the privilege this afternoon of introducing Stephen, I thought I'd best get the introduction material from the people who are most proud of him. So I thought about the things that his dad has told me over the years, and I emailed his big brother, and then I called his mom. Now don't worry, Stephen, I'm not going to share any embarrassing stories that they told me. Well, when I first became acquainted with the Lewises, Stephen was about to graduate high school and head off to the Naval Academy, as his older brother John had done before him, and his younger brother Charlie would do a few years later. Stephen graduated in honors from the Naval Academy in 1995. He began his career as a pilot, flying P-3s. And during the first 10 years of that Navy career, Stephen was deployed several times, according to his mom, including some deployments to Africa and the Middle East. And she recalled that as part of his training, Stephen had the opportunity to land a jet on an aircraft carrier. Now, if you've ever seen that happen, live or on video, I think you probably agree with me it's pretty impressive to watch. In 2005, Stephen had a career switch. He decided he wanted to be a doctor. And as I understand it, he had to forfeit all the rank that he had earned to date in the Navy in order to attend medical school at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. When he graduated from medical school, he had a 5-year residency to complete. Now, I remember this part of Stephen's journey from talking with his dad. After his first year of residency, he had decided he wanted to specialize in radiation oncology. And the best program, at least in his estimation, was at Duke University. And I remember Stephen's dad telling me that there was some uncertainty about whether the Navy would approve a residency at Duke. Well, Duke wanted Stephen, and that was enough to impress the Navy. Dr. Stephen Lewis is now serving as the Chief of Radiation Oncology at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Med school graduation was 2009, and then he had a 5-year residency, and he's already head of this department. Oh, yeah, and he's regained the rank that he lost in that career switch. Now, I'd say that's pretty impressive. His proud big brother, John, tells me that Lieutenant Commander Stephen Lewis has received the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, and numerous campaign and service awards. But there was something that his mom said that really resonated with me, and she said it's something close to this. I don't really remember all of the reasons that my sons earned medals or other recognitions. I often didn't know where they were or what their mission was. So most of the time, I couldn't help but just remember them as my little boys. That got me thinking. And I believe that it's relevant to the reason that we're here today. The Lewis sons, along with every man and woman currently serving or having served, whether you're here in this room or elsewhere around the world, are heroes, as these very beautiful young faces sang about a minute ago. They're all impressive. But they're more than servicemen and women. Stephen is husband to Tracy and father to 4 children, including 16-year-old twins. And in his spare time, however it is that he finds such a thing, he coaches his daughter's soccer team. Our veterans, our active duty service members, their spouses, their parents, their soccer coaches. And they're someone's little boys and girls. Let's remember that as we honor them today and consider what we should be doing for them in 2015. Now I hope that you will join me in extending a very warm welcome to our speaker, Dr., Chief, and Lieutenant Commander Stephen Lewis.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. That was quite an introduction, and I'm emotional from the get-go with Dad's introduction at the beginning, getting me emotional, and then the rest of this has been emotional. So we'll see how this goes, because I think some things in here will probably trip me up. But it's a real honor and privilege to be here. I really appreciate you having me here. I think there's a bigger crowd here than last year. I'm pretty sure that my brother thinks it's because they thought he was giving the talk again. But you got me this year. So Amy Hall alluded to the title of the talk, which is what we should be doing for our veterans in 2015. And so a few weeks ago, I attended my 20th anniversary of my graduation from the Naval Academy. And we had an opportunity to hear the current superintendent of the Naval Academy give a talk to all the classes that happened to be celebrating that weekend. And there were probably about 7 different classes. Mine was the youngest. The oldest group there were celebrating their 75th anniversary, the class of 1940 from the Naval Academy. And there were 3 of those gentlemen, and I promise I did not know that we were going to be honoring a World War II veteran here today, but I do talk a little about that war. Excuse me. And the superintendent talked a little bit about each class and what they had contributed over the years. And his comments about the 1940 class was, this was the most decorated class ever to graduate from the Naval Academy. And you can imagine, they all served through the entirety of World War II. So in some ways, that's not surprising. People have said, as you mentioned, Mr. Austin, that the Great War originally was World War I. But in truth, World War II, I think, is really the great war of our time. Our class, I'm happy to say, the superintendent mentioned, had done the real heavy lifting in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm proud to say I believe that's true of the people I worked with and graduated with. So as I sat there, listening to the superintendent, I was thinking about today. I had agreed and was pleased to have the opportunity to speak here. And I was thinking of, what am I going to talk about? And having this cross-section of veterans in one room and listening to a little snippet about each one of those groups kind of made me think about what's the difference between what veterans experienced in the 1940s and that time frame and perhaps what they experience now in 2015. I think back then the perception of a real threat to the American people was very present for the average American. Japan had taken over an American protectorate in the Philippines. They have invaded and taken over most of Southeast Asia. They had attacked Hawaii. Germany had taken over Europe. They had invaded Russia. U-boats were as far as the Gulf of Mexico. They mined New York Harbor. And at night, if you lived up in that area, you could go out on the coastline and watch ships sink. You could see the fires on the ocean, literally from our shores. They were attacking our ships that close. So I think it was a very tangible thing to the average American. And I think the veterans back then, we have one that would know, probably had a good sense the American people were behind them. I don't think there was a lot of question whether we should attack Normandy or whether we should work our way, as I believe you participated in, attacking across the Pacific and winning that back. I would also think it's safe to say perhaps that there's not quite the same conviction about the conflicts we're engaged in these days. I'm not sure the average American can really sense what events taking place in Afghanistan, how that directly affects their personal safety or the well-being of our country directly. And I don't think that that's, anything, I'm not trying to be negative about that. It's actually pretty hard to connect the dots sometimes, between those events over there and how that affects us here. That does not reflect poorly on anyone. And it's particularly hard to measure success when success equates to preventing something that actually never happens. How do you measure that? Another difference between the experience of veterans now and veterans in those past eras, in particular back then, is it took weeks, months to come home. Now veterans sometimes get on a plane and they are back in one day. And there's some good things about that for sure. I'm sure the fellas coming home on ships and taking a month to get home wish it was one day. But it's also tough to transition back without having, perhaps that long commute, if you will, home. But let me mention a couple things that I think don't change about veterans from era to era. By and large, when they raise their right hand to commit, they have an intense loyalty to the United States. And I think they also have an intense trust, an immense amount of trust in our government and our leaders and the decisions they're making. So today is a day to honor and celebrate this great contract between our veterans and our public. It's a day to think about what we should be doing for our veterans in 2015. I've already had a couple today, and the thank yous for your service I do appreciate, and I know every veteran does. And those, please, everyone should do that. I do that. But it is time for us to also put our money and our energy where our mouths are. We need to honor their service by ensuring they are not coming home to be unemployed or underemployed. Employers need to be made to realize that veterans are extremely hardworking, mission-oriented. They don't complain, and they know how to do more with less, as they've had to do that often in their service. When members of the National Guard and Reserves deploy and leave their normal job, it's our business leaders' duty to ensure that they don't suffer consequences in their careers. Times are different now than the 1940s. There was an economic boom after the war, and there was a large effort to reintegrate those veterans back into the workforce. And frankly, there had been a gap they'd been missing from the workforce as they were all off fighting. But we do still have the largest economy in the world. The next closest economy is 60% smaller than our economy. We should foster growth and development of our veterans by supporting continuance of the GI Bill, which some veterans may be taking advantage of attending here at New River. We should support DoD tuition assistance programs. These are programs for active duty and their dependents to actually go to school while they're serving. We should increase funding for Pell Grants and other scholarships and other mechanisms for veterans to obtain higher education. Last and most close to me, we should not forget that veterans have unique medical needs, some of them physical, some of them mental, but we are bound by contract, a contract of honor, to manage and treat those as best as we can. And a new issue, it's not completely new, but it's changed quite a lot in the last several years, is that we need to recognize the unique needs of women who have served. There are 2 million if you can believe that. Nearly 2 million women veterans now. And they have unique needs, unique medical needs, screening. I can tell you during training, the VA hospitals really weren't equipped to do mammograms routinely because there just weren't enough women veterans for them to have their own equipment and expertise. And so they would, the few that did need that, they would actually have them go somewhere else. But now, with 2 million veterans, you know, they've had to step up and make some changes. It's those kinds of things that need to happen. And we actually need to ask some tough questions about our VA medical system and whether it's meeting its obligations to our veterans. I'm sure that you've seen some of these stories in the news. These are all very complex issues. It's not something we can address, you know, in one session. We need to also remember that it's not just the veterans themselves. Amy brought it up. It's also the families of these veterans that are dealing with loss of life, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and other physical and mental and medical ailments. I spoke to a gentleman a few weeks ago whose son had served in Iraq. He told me that when his son came up to him and said he wanted to join the Marine Corps, he really didn't want him to go. I thought I'd go a little farther in this story before this would happen. He was afraid he'd be killed. And so his son, of course, still joined the Marine Corps. He came home from Iraq. He did a deployment. And he came home safe. And his dad really didn't want him to go back. And when I speak of the loyalty that veterans have to the United States, it's something that also extends to their units. And in this particular Marine felt compelled. His unit was going back. His friends were going back. And so he went back. He went to Afghanistan. He was on patrol. His Humvee was struck by an IED. He was badly wounded. And he was flown home to Walter Reed, where I work. He lost both legs, one arm, and underwent multiple surgeries, as you might imagine. Ultimately, he died of his wounds. Prior to that deployment, he had made his will. As is customary before going into a combat zone, you update your will. And he had told his dad, even though his whole family lives on the East Coast now, he was born in a small town in California, and he told his dad, if the worst should happen, I want to go home. So his dad honored his request, flew him back to California. Their whole family went, of course. And his dad told me, and you could tell as he reflected on this, that the one thing that got him through this time period is he said in this small town where no one knew him, didn't know who this Marine was, as that motorcade passed on its way to the cemetery, everyone stopped, turned, put their hands over their heart. So, I tell you this story to kind of reinforce that it's not just the veterans, it's also the families. And, you never know when a simple gesture may be what a father holds on to. And so in the year 2015, amongst the larger things I mentioned, there are a lot, we also need the smaller things. We need these kinds of programs to bring attention to veterans and to honor them for their service. We need rooms set aside, as they've done here, for veterans to congregate while they're in class and here undergoing education. We need these advisory councils that's been put together here. These kinds of programs are essential and crucial. So the threats to us these days may not be so tangible as they were 70 years ago. But they are real. I can assure you that. We the people of this country, need to return the loyalty and the trust that our veterans have given us when they raised their right hands. Thank you for having me here today. God bless.